tear it falls and hits the ground. A tree it falls without a sound. A bird it calls and sends you home. A man he sits in the cold all alone.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome so much, and thank you so much for being here. Please introduce yourself to everyone, and then we'll dive in.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this conference. My name is Sarah, and for those who might know me from Instagram, I'm the pregnancy after loss doula. I am mama to a baby in heaven that we call Peanut, and to a baby who is about to be born really any day now. His name is Josiah. Birth and bereavement doula.
So, let's dive into your first sort of pregnancy and what you were doing before that, because I know you were a pregnancy doula, so you were kind of preparing yourself in a sense for your own pregnancy. So yeah, let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, so the very, very beginning starts a lot of years ago. um, I have always been interested in birth, and eventually, well, my parents' best friends had their baby in our house, and so just birth was kind of a thing that we talked about a lot. Um, and I've always been interested in it. And so sometime shortly after college, I learned what a doula was. A doula is a support person for birth. We don't do anything medical, but we're just there for emotional and physical support for the mom during birth and to help with understanding what's going on and filling in knowledge and that kind of stuff. And I was like, that's what I want to do and what I want to be. So I became a doula before I ever had was pregnant or had children or anything. Um, and then in the fall of 2020, my husband and I found out that we were pregnant, and we were so excited. We'd only been trying for 2 months at that point. And so I expected it to take longer, honestly, for us to get pregnant, but I was so excited. Um, and then just a few weeks into pregnancy, I had a little bit of spotting that I was concerned about. Um, and my doula training told me it was nothing to worry about, but my gut told me this is not good. And so I booked an appointment with my OB the very next day and went in and was told what every mom dreads hearing and what I believe everybody part of this conference has heard, that there is no heartbeat and that my baby had died. Um, and at that point, my baby had probably been gone for 2 weeks at that point, and I didn't even know it. Um, uh, he, I think it was a boy, so we call him a he, but I think that um, he was measuring about 5 weeks, and I should have been about 7 weeks along, and there was no heartbeat, and um, it was COVID, so I was at that appointment all alone, and I left the doctor's office kind of in shock and didn't start crying until I was in the car trying to FaceTime my husband and was like, you have to pick up. You have to pick up because I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't answer. And that's when the tears started coming. And when it settled in that maybe this is real and maybe I am one of those people who loses a baby. And no one in my family had ever lost a baby before. No one in my husband's family had ever lost a baby before, at least not immediate family. And so we were just at a loss, didn't know what to do. And um, so I went home, and I am a big researcher. And also because of being a doula, I knew that this is a baby and that it wouldn't just be a heavy period like the doctor told me.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what to expect. So I started doing tons of searching and looking and trying to understand. And stumbled across a website called Still Birthday. And Still Birthday was the first place that I found that acknowledged that even a very, very early birth, like mine, was still a birth, and a baby is still born. And there are still contractions, your cervix still dilates. It is very much a birth. And so I went into the next couple of weeks with that knowledge of I'm looking for labor signs. And when I am going into labor, then I know that my body is miscarrying this baby. Yeah, so all of that, the learning that Peanut had passed away, that was 2 days before Christmas, or 3 days before Christmas. And we right away called our parents, and they cried with us and prayed with us. And I'm thankful for godly parents, because even in our sorrow, they reminded us of the care of God, and that even though we didn't understand it, that this wasn't a surprise to God. And we knew that they would pray for us. And really that was what we needed at that time, was the promise that people would pray for us and that they loved us. So we told them the very day that we found out. And then over the next couple of days, we told our siblings. And that is not something you ever want to tell people at all, but especially at Christmas time. So yeah, and my siblings and my husband's siblings, they cried with us and they prayed with us and they loved us and assured us that they loved our baby too. And I have one sister who has some special needs. And she at first didn't understand what was going on. So her very first question was it a boy or a girl? And we, of course, didn't know that it was really. And then her second question was, what was his name? And at that point, we had been calling the baby Peanut. And so Peanut was the only answer that I had. And she would not have taken, we didn't name the baby, for an answer. So I just told her Peanut. And so since then, we've called the baby Peanut. And I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, no, that's a great name. Peanut's a great name, and she wouldn't have known, like she wouldn't have taken that no name. She wouldn't take that lying down.
Yeah, so baby Peanut.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So baby Peanut it was. And my in-laws came on the day before Christmas Eve, so only a day after we found out all of this stuff. And they were coming for Christmas, but it was a blessing to have them here, because my mother-in-law and my sisters-in-law, they just took over all the practical side of life and really took care of me and made sure that I was still eating, and made sure that I was still going to sleep, or trying to go to sleep. Made sure my house was clean, just all the super practical things that when you're in the middle of freaking out and grieving, that you just don't think about.
Yeah.
My natural tendency is to forget to eat when I'm stressed or hurting or whatever. And so to have somebody there to say, we made you food and you need to sit down and eat it, was really helpful for me. And it was good for my husband to have someone to talk to and to process with besides me. So I'm thankful that they were all here. And so we had a follow-up appointment on New Year's Eve, and they confirmed nothing had changed. But I still was very much pregnant with a baby who was not alive, which is a really hard thing to process.
Yeah.
But I'm thankful for our doctor. He was very gracious and kind, and he kind of laid out our options for us and said, these are the options that you have. He didn't have any qualms about letting us continue until my body naturally miscarried. he did say that it would be like a heavy period, which is not true. But other than that, he was very helpful and kind. And we're thankful for him too, because I know most people who go through this, their doctors just don't understand or don't know how to handle it. So I'm thankful for our doctor. And he allowed my husband into that second ultrasound and that second appointment, even though he technically shouldn't have because of COVID. So I'm thankful that he was willing to bend the rules a little bit, because I needed my husband there. So
yeah.
So that was New Year's Eve. And then January 5th, I started feeling everything that I told my clients was what labor was like. There was contractions. I felt kind of sick to my stomach, all of labor, and didn't sleep very much that night. And about 2 o'clock, it got to the point where I couldn't even leave the toilet. I was bleeding too much. And for those who don't know, you shouldn't be bleeding that much, as much as I was. The bleeding from an early loss like that should not fill a pad in less than an hour, except for at the height of loss, it can fill a pad twice in an hour. But if it's any more than that, it's at a dangerous level. But I didn't know that. And I was bleeding way, way too much. And about 3 o'clock, I called for my husband and told him I thought I was going to throw up and I needed him to bring something for me to throw up into because I couldn't leave the toilet. And he got to the bathroom just in time to catch me when I passed out. So I'm sorry if that's TMI, but that's our story.
Honestly, it's all really important. All really important.
So that was very traumatizing for him. Yeah. So that was super traumatizing for my husband to catch his wife when I passed out. And he kept a level head and he got me on the floor, and safely without hurting anything. And waited for me to come to, and then said, "We're going to the emergency room right now, and you don't have a choice," because he knew that I would push back against that. I really did not want to go to the hospital. But at that point, I was so out of it, I just didn't even argue with him. So we got to the hospital, and we live in a very small town, and it does have an ER, but it's not very well staffed. Even before COVID, it wasn't. But again, this was COVID year. It was January 2021, so things were still weird because of COVID. And we got there and they were much more concerned about checking to see if I had a fever and if I had any signs of COVID than they were about the fact that there was literally a trail of blood coming into the emergency room. And then my husband kind of got a little upset, and he's normally very much a teddy bear, doesn't get upset very easily at all. And he was like, my wife is bleeding out. Can we take her back to a room? And he was kind about it. He was pretty chill, in my opinion, about it. But it scared the nurse, because my husband is 6'5" and looks like a mountain. And she called security on him.
Oh, no.
And the security guard who came out was smaller than me, and there's no way he would have been able to handle my husband if Colton had decided to fight back. But that's beside the point. But eventually they realized, oh, there's actually an emergency going on here, and maybe we should bring this girl back. So by that point, I was sitting in a wheelchair, and they wheeled me back into a room, and the on-call ER doctor came in, and he just treated it like it was any other intake for any other patient. Started asking me COVID screening questions and asked me if I knew that we had been pregnant. And I was like, yes, we know that I'm miscarrying. But he had no sense of urgency whatsoever. And so I started feeling very much like I had felt in the bathroom earlier that night. And so I reached out and grabbed the doctor and I said, I need you to understand that I'm going to pass out right now. And then I did. Passed out on the hospital bed. And when I came to again, they finally were taking me seriously. And I had IVs coming out of both arms. And I actually felt much better at that point. I think that just getting fluids into my body was healthy and helpful for me. Imagine that, right? Thinking about it afterwards with people, they were like, oh, I'm sure you were so scared, or weren't you terrified? And really, I wasn't. And I'm not sure if that's because there were so many people praying for me, or if it was because I was too out of it to register fear. But really, in those moments, all I felt was peace, that the Lord would take care of me, that this was His plan, even if I still did not understand it, and that everything would be okay, which doesn't really make sense even now saying it. But during all of that, they decided to do an ultrasound because they just didn't know if the baby was still there or not. But there was so much bleeding in my body that they had to use like a vacuum to kind of clean that out.
Oh, wow.
And while they were doing that, the baby came out. And I'm, even if that doctor was a little clueless at first, I'm so thankful for him later. Because he got out our baby and he introduced me to our baby and brought the baby over to me so that I could see him and meet him and touch him. Which I know lots of moms have not been able to meet their babies, and that hurts my heart. But I'm so thankful for that doctor and for his willingness to do that, to go the extra mile for us. And then he took the baby out to the parking lot where my husband was waiting and introduced Colton to Peanut. And so my husband was able to take pictures that we later were able to look back on. And I'm thankful for that. That was something that he did not need to do. And I think he technically broke rules to do that. But that was very special to my husband and I, and something that both of us still cherish. I'm sorry, I still can't talk about this part without crying.
Oh, so that's okay.
You'll just have to be okay.
you've got me crying too, so
yeah, so that's
rubbing it off.
Yeah. Well, so that's our birth story. And they did finish the ultrasound, and the ultrasound tech said that I have a beautiful uterus, so whatever that means. And later in the morning, we have a good friend, somebody that I consider like a second mom, that works in that ER, and she just happened to be on shift that morning. And when she got to the hospital, she saw our car sitting in the parking lot, and she immediately went over, found my husband, and found out what was going on, prayed with him and cried with him. And then she came in, and when she clocked in, she came immediately to my room, and prayed with me and cried with me and hugged me and really validated so much of what I was feeling. She had had a loss right before I was born, and she has a daughter that's a few months younger than me. So she had a loss before that. Her very first baby was also a loss. That's what I'm trying to say. So she understood what I was going through, and she knew how to pray for me and what to pray for me in that moment. And that was just another grace of God that I needed a friend, and that she was there for us. Yeah. And then eventually I was sent home to try and sort out what life was going to look like now. One of my favorite quotes as a doula is that every time, something about every time a baby is born, a mother is also born. And I think that's true even when the baby who is born has died, that the mother, the that the person that you are after birth, even of a baby who has died, is not the same as the one before. The mother is also born. And so, as lost mamas, we are moms, and we are different after birth than we were before. And that's okay. It's a normal thing and it's a healthy thing. But sometimes it's a lot of work to try and work through. And it is an emotional and messy process. But yeah, so that's a process that I've been learning now for 2 years. We just passed the 2-year anniversary of all of that just a couple weeks ago. So, and I clearly am still messy about it because I'm still crying about it even 2 years later, and that's okay. That messiness is okay.
I've got to say that bit where they're like, oh, you have such a nice uterus. It's like, what does that do for me right now? Nothing. Like, don't tell me I have a nice uterus. Like, I've just lost a baby. Like, oh, but you shouldn't have any problems now. And it's like, I just went through like full-on trauma, and you're saying that's doesn't quite fit, but thanks.
And you're telling me I have a beautiful uterus.
Yeah. And what you said is so valid. Like when it comes to giving birth, regardless of whether the baby is going to be here on earth or whether it's going to go to heaven, like, if the baby's gone, you still had a birth, you still have a postpartum. And I think so many women forget and don't think that they're going through a postpartum. And like I actually got an extra issue from being postpartum, and I'll just say, TMI, I started having incontinence from having the loss, and I think it's just where my cervix didn't soften enough, because it was an egg thing that I gave birth to. So it just shows that everything, we're still going through something. Our body is still recovering, and we have to remember that, even if we lost the baby, because it was still a process. Our body still went for a process, and we need to really think about that. So I know you moved into loss, being a sort of loss doula as well. So yeah, tell us about that and sort of how you transitioned from the loss and sort of like going through that and being a pregnancy doula to then going, I want to do this.
So I think a lot of it had to do with that I had some really good support and some really helpful support, but I also wished for more. I wished that there was somebody that I could talk to who understood the process of delivering a baby who was not alive, and who could explain it to me in clear terms. And then somebody who understood what normal looked like and what normal or what not normal looked like, because I did not have a normal experience, and I could have died from my experience, and that was not normal. And I didn't have anybody to ask those questions. And so a lot of it started with just, I want to be the person that people can ask those questions. And then I want to be the person that they're not afraid to talk to, that they know will understand and they know will come with compassion, and won't say all the triggering things afterwards. All that we always hear, at least it was so early, or at least you can try again, or those things that we all hate so much. I wanted to be that person that people knew was safe to come to, I guess. So I think it started there. And then the website that I had found in those couple of weeks in between, Stillbirthday, I found out somewhere along the way that they certified bereavement doulas, and I never even heard of a bereavement doula before. But that was somebody who was trained in birth, but what birth looks like when the baby's not alive, and how to support that, and how to show that extra measure of compassion that is needed, and be an advocate for moms during that and all of that. So I kind of just loosely started following their page. I wasn't sure how interested, if at all, I was in all of this, but was really just praying about how the Lord would use me in this new space that I found. And they, Stillbirth Day, had a sale where the training was only, I don't remember, I think it was $45 to celebrate Stillbirth Day's founding. And it was only a 24-hour sale. And it really was not a good time to start. But I went to my husband and I was like, if I'm going to do this thing, then now is the time to do it. And are you okay with that? He was like, yes, I think you should go for it. I think this is something you need to do. And I was like, really? I kind of expected him to say no, to be honest. But he was like, yes, I think you need to do this. I think moms need this. And I think that you are the one to do it. And I was like, okay. So I bought the training and I was afraid to start it. It took me a couple of weeks to do it because honestly, I was just scared. I didn't know what kind of trauma it would bring up for me and what kind of more healing I would have to do because of taking the training. So I started the training eventually. And it really was a healing process for me. It was very validating. Yeah, you did have a birth. You birthed a baby, and your baby is valid, even if he died so early and so young. It was a life. And then it was also, hey, what you went through is not normal. And that's okay. It's okay to still have trauma about it. And it's okay to be grieving still. I kind of was, we lost Peanut in January and I started the training in August. So it was only 7 months later, but I thought that I should be done grieving and I was upset that I was still grieving. And this training validated that I was still grieving and that that was normal and that you don't really stop grieving a baby ever. Just like people don't stop grieving a child that died at 3 or 4 years old or 15 or 17 years old. You just don't stop grieving that. You wouldn't be a parent if you stopped, if that makes sense. Now that grieving changes and grows and it looks different at different stages, but you will always miss that baby. So it was really helpful for me to even just take the training for my own self and for my own heart and to start processing some of that trauma in a healthy way. So I certified with them in September, but I didn't want to let go of quote unquote normal pregnancy and birth. I still love live birth and the joy that comes with that. And so I, through lots of counseling with different people in my church who understood my story and understood my heart, and with my husband and with my mom and my mother-in-law, I started the pregnancy after loss doula in November of 2022.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure what the Lord was going to do with it. Even 5 followers felt like a huge deal back then. It was going to be a space for people to process that they lost a baby, and then a space for I'm pregnant again and I'm terrified and I don't know what to do. Just from a super practical standpoint, I knew that I would need that whenever the time came for me to be pregnant again, and I knew that other people needed it too. So, and then through all of that, we were trying for a baby again, and the Lord just wasn't giving us one and wasn't giving us one. And when we passed the year mark, I was devastated because in my mind, if you pass a year of trying, then you're infertile and you can't have children. And I had so much to learn about infertility. I mean, I was so clueless. I thought infertility was like a one and done diagnosis. I didn't realize how much went into all of that, and how much emotion there is involved in infertility. And I had no idea.
Yeah.
And so we went 17 months of trying for another baby, and which I know is really a blink of an eye in comparison to a lot of people, but no matter how long it is, it's hard. It's hard when you want a baby so desperately and nothing is happening. And it feels like you're just stuck in life and that you can't move forward because you're stuck wanting something that the Lord isn't giving you. But then through lots of just personal researching and all of that, I was doing the pregnancy after loss doula stuff, and there were a lot of people dealing with infertility who followed me on there. And so I started researching just infertility in general because I wanted to be able to relate to these people, and started realizing how many different symptoms of progesterone deficiency I had through that. And so I went to a doctor and I was like, I think that I'm deficient in progesterone and I would like to be tested and be put on progesterone supplements if that's possible. And they were like, nope, we can't do that. I was like, what? Why not? Because you have to have had 3 losses in order to have progesterone testing. Well, that's stupid.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it doesn't make sense that little lives have to be lost before you'll do this testing. When I have so many of the symptoms of it. So I was furious, but couldn't really do anything about it because they refused to test.
Yeah.
So my parents had just moved to Idaho, and my mom was seeing a new doctor. And she just happened to mention to this doctor, my daughter is going through infertility, but she can't find anybody who will listen to her. And the doctor said, I bet she's progesterone deficient. And my mom was like, yeah, that's what she thinks too. And the doctor said, okay, well, we'll send her progesterone supplements if she wants them. And my mom was like, really? And they were like, yeah, we'll send her progesterone supplement. And it was an oil. And we'll send her the instructions. And in this doctor was like, because I think that 90% of infertility has to do with progesterone deficiency, which I don't know if that's an accurate statistic or not, but that's what this doctor believed.
Yeah.
So my mom called me and she's like, hey, if I get you progesterone supplements, will you take them? And I was like, yes. How are you doing this? I don't understand. So this doctor sent me progesterone oil and I started taking it. And within the first month, my period came, but it was the best period that I would ever had. That
Wow.
sounds horrible, but I didn't have as much cramping and the bleeding wasn't as heavy, and it changed a lot. And I didn't have nearly as much PMS symptoms. My husband even was like, you kind of are acting normal. What's wrong with you? And so I was like, well, maybe this is working and maybe this is something. So I kept doing it for another month, and the same thing, I got my period, but I felt so much better about where I was physically. I just felt healthier. I was sleeping better. My cycle was actually normal that cycle. It was just super weird for me. And the next cycle, I kept on the progesterone, but I didn't ovulate until day 31 of my cycle, which was not normal for me. I normally ovulated around day 13 or 14. And I was like, what's going on? Why am I not ovulating? And I think a lot of it had to do with we traveled. We took 2 road trips that month, and traveling throws off your cycle, which that's a whole different topic. But because I was tracking my cycle and doing all the natural fertility stuff, I knew when I ovulated. So I ovulated. 2 weeks later, my husband and I were cleaning an Airbnb as a side job. And I was like, before we go clean, I'm just going to take a test, because then I'll know if I can bleach the shower or if I need to wait a little while longer to bleach the shower this time. That was all that was going on in my mind. So I went and took a test and it turned up positive right away. And I was freaking out. was like, how is this possible? I mean, it was what I wanted and it was what I had prayed for, and yet it still caught me off guard, and I just couldn't believe it. And immediately, of course, all the fears and doubts of what if this baby doesn't stay? What if this baby dies too? What if, what if, what if? And I walked out of the bathroom shaking and holding the test. And my husband thought it was negative because I was crying. And he was like, it's okay. It's all right. It doesn't have to be this month. And I was like, no, what? And I couldn't even really speak. And so when he saw on it, he freaked out too. And he was like, okay, are you allowed to even go clean? What are you okay? What can you do? So both of us were just not really sure what to think, honestly. This was what we had prayed for, and yet there was still so much fear involved. And do we even say this out loud? Because if we say it out loud, will we jinx it kind of feeling? Yeah. So we went to work at the Airbnb, and both of us kind of tried to pretend that it wasn't a thing. And then we went out for lunch, and it was like this big elephant in the room of, do we talk about the fact that you're pregnant right now? And finally my husband said, okay, so the last one was Peanut. What do we call this one? And it was just a super normal conversation that normal parents would have, I think. And I think we settled on Chickpea, but we never actually used that nickname for him. He was just baby. And every day I would wake up thinking, I'm going to see spotting today. And I would go to the bathroom and I would check, and everything would be clean and everything would be fine. And then I would go all throughout the day freaking out and literally every second saying, in this moment, I am pregnant. In this moment, I am pregnant. In this moment, I am pregnant. And God's going to take care of us. And whatever happens will be in his plan. And he still loves us no matter what happens. And he is still good no matter what the result is. And in this moment, I am pregnant. And in this moment, God is good. And my husband would come home and he would ask, any blood? No, there's no blood. Okay. And both of us would be able to relax. And then he would say, is God still good? And I would say, yes, God is still good. And he would say, if we lost this baby, would God still be good? And I would say, yes, God would still be good. And it was just constant reminding ourselves of what was true, that God is still good. God still loves us. God is still in control. As far as we know, this baby is still healthy. I am still pregnant. Just so much forcing ourselves to remind ourselves of what it was true. So we found out on a Saturday that I was pregnant. That next Wednesday, my dad just happened to be coming on kind of a business trip. And so we met him at the airport and told him, you're going to be a pop-up again. Finally getting to tell my parents, you're going to be grandparents, without having to give the caveat of, but you have to wait until heaven to meet your grandbaby, was so sweet. And we cried a lot. But it was such different tears than the last time. And my parents, of course, were very anxious about it too, and very uncertain. But we got to tell my parents the Wednesday before Father's Day. And then we got to tell my husband's parents on Father's Day, you're going to be grandparents, and this is the best Father's Day gift we could possibly give you. Our two families just launched into a long season of prayer. And sometimes it was literally constant prayer of, Lord, please protect this baby. Please protect Sarah. Please protect the baby. Please protect Sarah. And then our first appointment came up and we were terrified. I threw up on the way down. I'm not sure if it was because of morning sickness or because I was scared or both. But we got into that ultrasound room, and it was early enough that they weren't going to let us listen to the heartbeat because the baby was still too little. But if it showed up on the screen, then we would get to see it. Well, they couldn't even find a baby. I was probably only 5 weeks along, and they couldn't find anything. The whole screen was just black. And of course, that puts you in a spiral of, oh no, not again. Here we go. Are we going to choose to trust God? Yes, we're going to choose to trust God, but I don't know what's going on. And they said, how far along do you think you are? And I said, 5 weeks. And they said, well, the baby might just be too small to find. So come back in a week. Okay. So we went home. We spent an entire week begging God to allow us to have this baby. And then speaking out the words that we would trust him no matter what, because we know that he is good. We know that he loves us. We know that he is worthy of our trust. And then we went back in a week and saw the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. A little baby with a flickering heartbeat on that ultrasound screen. I still can't believe it. I'm sorry, we're both crying now. But I just couldn't believe that God would be so gracious to us to give us a living baby. And I mean, at 6 weeks, you know that there's always a chance that baby won't survive either. But it was such an encouraging moment to my heart that God allowed me to see my living baby, even if it was just once.
Yeah.
And I cried about this hard seeing it. But we went home and we called our family and we said, there's a heartbeat. We saw his heart or her. We didn't know. But there's a heartbeat. This baby's alive. And God is so good and so gracious to us. And then we prayed some more and we begged God to continue allowing the baby to grow some more. And then we at 12 weeks, we went to our midwife appointment and we heard his heartbeat on the Doppler and we just couldn't believe it. It's the most beautiful sound to hear a heartbeat. And on the way home, it was, okay, God is still gracious to us and he would be gracious even if we hadn't heard the heartbeat. But God is so kind to allow us to hear this. And God is so kind to be giving us a baby that is thriving right now. He even kicked the Doppler like really hard while we were at that appointment. It was really cool. And then I started feeling baby movements, and that was crazy. Like I couldn't even believe that. And then about 18 weeks pregnant-ish, I woke up in the morning and realized that I hadn't felt the baby move since like yesterday afternoon. And it had gotten to the point where it was waking me up at night feeling the baby move. And I was very concerned, obviously. So I messaged my midwife and I said, hey, I haven't heard the baby move in about 18 hours or felt the baby move. What do I need to do? Because I'm trying really hard not to freak out right now. And she said, drink something sugary and cold, wait half an hour, and then call me if he doesn't move in half an hour. So I drank something cold and sugary. All we had that was sugary in the house was Dr. Pepper. And I have never drank a soda so fast in my life. and my husband was there. We prayed together. And I'm a teacher, so I went to school. But I told my principal, I'm going to have to leave at 8:15 if my baby doesn't move by then. And she was like, why are you even here? So I didn't feel the baby move. I was, of course, freaking out and pretty terrified. And I went and got my co-teacher and I said, hey, I'm leaving. I haven't felt the baby move. We're going to go to the midwives. Called my husband on the way home and said, meet me at the door. We're going down to Greenville. Like we have to go down. We have to know. And we live about an hour and 15 minutes from my midwife's office. So that hour and 15-minute drive going down windy mountain roads was the longest of my life. And my husband and I, we just cried the whole way down. And we begged God to help us to trust him, because we just couldn't trust God at that moment. Um, we felt like our worst fears were coming true again. Um, the only explanation either of us could think of was that the baby was dead. Um, and so we drove down praying, begging the Lord to help us to trust him. Um, we didn't even ask that the baby would still be alive or that the baby would be healthy because we were so sure that he had died. Um, and we got to the midwife's office, and my midwife is a believer too. And she prayed with us really quick. And then she said, all right, let's just skip all the funny business and listen. And she got out the Doppler, put it on my tummy, and we heard a heartbeat.
Oh.
And we just couldn't believe it. And all of us in the office burst into tears, couldn't stop crying, didn't even talk to each other for a few minutes because we were just so relieved. And while we were listening, we heard the baby kick the Doppler, but I didn't feel it. And he kicked the Doppler multiple times, and I didn't feel it a single time that he kicked the Doppler. And so our best guess is that my placenta had moved, that it was kind of low lying in the front and it just moved up and was covering his movements so that I couldn't feel them. But we could hear him, and he was kicking away. He was pretty mad about being disturbed. Excuse me, about being disturbed. But I don't think I've ever been so thrilled to hear kicking before. So the midwife said, she said, expect it to be a couple of days before you feel movements again, but I'm not concerned now because we've heard his heartbeat, we've heard him kick, he's fine. And so we went home rejoicing and praising the Lord and a little bit ashamed at our lack of faith. And we called our parents and said, hey, there's nothing to worry about. The baby's fine. Thanks for praying with us again. And my parents, this is side note, but they were in a notary's office signing papers to buy a house when they got our texts that the baby was fine. And mom said that they just burst into tears at the notary's office. And the notary was like, is everything okay? But what an emotional day that was. And then 2 weeks later, we got our anatomy scan. We got to see him moving and kicking and literally like doing flips in my belly. And we have the healthiest little man. And now it's to the point where his movements are almost painful.
Yeah.
But I feel him multiple times a day, every day. And so that's a long story, but we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if God chooses to, he can take this baby. And there still is that possibility that this baby will die, whether it's before birth or after birth or at 18 years old or whatever. We know that God is still sovereign and that God can do that if he chooses to. And we are learning to trust him with that. It's a daily battle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And for now, the Lord has allowed us to love this living little boy. And we're preparing for a baby shower in just a couple weeks and maternity pictures and things that a year ago I never would have even dreamed of, would have been too afraid to hope for. So all that to say that God is good. He's good through loss, and he's good through gifts. And our circumstances don't dictate whether or not God is good. He's good either way. So that's my story, and I hope it gives hope to somebody who's listening. So,
well, I'm sure it will. Gosh, you made me tear up a lot. having faith during this season can really uplift you, but it can also like take you into places where you're sort of like angry at God, and you sort of like, why did you do this? And it's not that he did it, he just allowed it. He allowed it to happen, but he didn't do it. And I think it's just remembering that God isn't the author. He isn't the author of evil or bad things that happen, because he is all good. But he does sometimes allow those things to happen. And just because you believe and you have faith and you love God doesn't mean that you're not going to be one of those ladies who has to lose a baby. Gosh. But I love your story. I just think it's so powerful, and that you had so many people around you, and that you were sort of like, you were kind of like journeyed through it. You were a pregnancy doula, and that kind of prepared you a little bit and gave you that understanding of like, this isn't normal, and that process. And then you were like, I'm gonna become a pregnancy after loss doula, and then that gave you more to kind of get through to this next stage and get through this. And I'm pregnant right now as well, and I'm 18 weeks, and I can so connect with you with the worry. And like that first ultrasound, I was so in that moment, and when I came out, I cried, because I was just like, oh my gosh, there's a real baby, and it's like there. And it's but we waited like, I think it was 8 weeks, because I didn't want to be like, oh, you're 5 weeks, so there's nothing there, you're gonna have to come next week. I was like, I'm just gonna really push myself and wait for like 8 weeks, because I don't want to be told my womb is empty, because that will break my heart. I was like, I'm gonna wait as long as I can. And I just held on. And there was a heartbeat and everything. But yeah, it's really, you don't realize how hard it is until you go through it. Like, people tell you, and you enter this world, but it's like, this lost world is just so, you don't know about it. It's so new. There's just so much to it, and there's so many different areas, and you don't realize until you start speaking to ladies and you start like seeing their stories. And it is really heartbreaking, like so much of it. And I'm so glad you got your mum got you those like the oil, because that really upset me too. Like when they said, oh, but there's only so much testing we could do, because you've only lost 2 babies, and that's not enough. And you lose one and you're like, that's enough. Like that's enough. Like, I don't need to lose more, but
it's the, what is it, the best club, or the worst club with the best members?
yeah you don't want to be in the club, but if you are, we're like, there's lots of us, and we'll be there for you, and we'll love each other. So but thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your faith, because your faith is just so powerful.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.